have your attached devices, so we can see everything that we're connected to, everything that's connected to our router. So in here, we've got a couple things. We've got my computer, we've got an access camera, we've got a Netgear switch. So we're gonna go and then log into this camera. So what's that? 192.168.1.6. It's 192.168.1.6. Alright, so that brings us to our IP camera. So these are the cameras that we usually use, these access cameras. We've got fixed ones and we've got PTZ ones. So to do anything in here, all you have to do, once you enter that IP address, it brings you to a login screen. And for these access cameras, the login is root and the password is root. It's root. I don't know why, that's just what the default is. So if we go to setup and then go to TCP IP, that's where we would set and see our address. So if we're on a network and we're doing IP cameras, we're going to want each and every camera to be assigned to a unique address. So we wouldn't want DHCP. DHCP is what a router does. It sends out a server, a DHCP server, which is usually like 50 addresses to 250 addresses. So every time you sign on to, let's say, Wi-Fi or Connect, this router says, okay, I recognize a new device, here it is, I'm going to automatically give them an address, that way they can connect and we have two-way communication and traffic flowing back and forth. So those are dynamic addresses. A static address would be an address that we would set it to that would permanently be there. So when I disconnect my computer from a Wi-Fi network and then, you know, a week later sign back on, that DHCP server is going to dish me out a new address. It's not going to be the same address. So that's why we have issues sometimes. Before we started setting static addresses, you know, we'd set up some of these networks at clients' sites, and then they would lose power, or somebody would turn the system off and then turn it back on. And then when they turn it back on, the router is dishing out a new address. So if they're trying to log into something remotely, they realize that that address has since changed and they can't get to it. So anything that clients need to be able to access remotely, like cameras or DVRs or things like that, we always need to set to a static address. That way it stays, you know, no matter if it gets rebooted, unplugged, plugged back in, it does, you know, it's the same address. So basically all we'd have to do is come in here and use the following IP address, then type in whatever our new address that we want it to be as, and hit save. So while I'm in here, while we're looking at these cameras, I guess, so the only really things we do with these network cameras is set it to a static address, and then in here too, you can actually zoom and focus the camera. I mean, this is a fixed camera, so all you get is zoom in and zoom out. You obviously can't pan and tilt it and all that. But on a lot of client sites, we go in and we install these things, and sometimes we forget to focus them. So there's a little autofocus button here. So if you hit autofocus, it kind of runs its course, finds its focus, and then locks it in place. So if you're setting up IP cameras, just make sure you remember that. So let's see. We had a couple other things in here that we could see. One is the switch, which is 1.5. So we'll log back into that. Password. So all these network devices have login information, have things that you can get into and change. We typically don't log into switches too often. But sometimes for troubleshooting purposes, if you're trying to figure out, you know, what's going on, if something's not working, or you've got a camera that's plugged in or an access point that's all, you know, PoE and it's not working, you know, there are some things that you can log into to check. Like so right now we're logged into the network switch, this little Netgear switch in the back. And like here, you can come over to PoE and you can actually check to see how much power the switch provides and what it actually is consuming. So right now you can see that we've only got one camera plugged into the network, and the consumed power is 5.5 watts. So we know that these cameras, you know, are consuming, you know, 5.5 watts of power. So these are a couple things that are helpful. So, all right, so the router, so if we're back in the router, if we go over to advanced, a lot of what we do also with networking stuff is a lot of the camera systems we do, we give them DVRs and NVRs so that they have remote access from their phones or from home that they can see things. So in here we'd go to advanced setup, and then there's two ways of doing remote viewing from things. The one we do most of the time is called port forwarding. So we can, in the router here in the advanced, we'd come over to port forwarding. What we do here is we find the IP address of the DVR, which I'll open up the DVR in a minute, but the DVR IP address was 1.3. So we would come in here, we would add 1.3 in. So we go service name, HTTP, we'd add it, and then you'd have an external starting point and an internal starting point, which is port 80. So we go, that saves. So now now the router is telling, okay, the outside world that, you know, the internet's coming in for this address through port 80, which is called, you know, the public port on a router. It's going to send communication back and forth through that port to the outside world. Make sense? All right, so let's switch over here real quick to the DVR. And in here, we'll go to menu. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Enter. Okay. All right. So this is the Honeywell Dvr. This is one of the brands we use most of the time. So we can go into settings here, and then we've got our settings, you know, blah, 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 through the DVR. I'm not going to go through everything. Just the basic network configuration. So it'll say what the address is here. So this is 1.3. This is what the router dished out, you know, via DHCP. So we would turn DHCP off so that it saves it to a static address. And here it is. So we would save it as 1.3. And then we have these server ports and the HTTP ports. So this is the port that it communicates going to the outside world. So we saw that on the router we had port 80. So we could come in here and we could delete it from 8,000, you know, back to 80. Or we could change the router to 8,000. So we just have to make sure that those two match. So we want the address and the server port to match what we would do on the router. That way the router, you know, passes communication back and forth to the DVR for access. So that's one way to do it. The other way is something called Ddns. Go. So every DVR server has a DDNS server that they pay for, and basically it's kind of a website, almost like a cloud base that they support. So this would be the other way to do it. You'd enable DDNS, and then you have a local name. So, you know, say we label this, you know, whatever, conf, who cares? So the device domain name would basically be conf at hrgdvr-ddns.com. So then on somebody's, you know, tablet or phone, if they wanted to log into it, they could enter conf at blah blah blah, and that's how they would gain access. That's a secondary way to do it, but like I said, the port forwarding is typically the way that we go about doing all this crap. So let's see. In routers, those are basically the big things that we do. We port forward for communication between DVRs, NVRs, and then we change all the security on it so that we know what all the admin logins are. We change the SSIDs, so the wireless has that, and obviously the password. And those are kind of the basic things. Obviously you can do 1,000 things with routers, but as far as what we're concerned about, it's all basic route. So anyway, like I said, there's 1,000 things that we're going to be doing in the future that are all network based. So play with your computer at home. On YouTube has a ton of free kind of networking basic classes, and they're helpful. So I'm hot